The desert wind howled through the canyon passes like a wounded animal, carrying with it the scent of sage and the promise of another merciless night. The sun, a dying ember on the horizon, painted the jagged rocks in shades of blood and rust. Sarah McKenzie pressed herself against a boulder, her breath coming in ragged gasps that seemed too loud in the vast silence of the Arizona Territory. Her dress, once a modest blue calico her mother had sewn with care, now hung in tatters from her shoulders. Dark stains, some mud, some blood, mapped the horror of the past 2 days across the fabric. She couldn't stop her hands from shaking as she peered around the rock face, searching the lengthening shadows for any sign of pursuit. Memories came in fragments, sharp as broken glass. The wagon train had been making good time toward Tucson when they struck. She remembered her father's voice, strong and reassuring, just moments before the first gunshot shattered the morning calm. Then chaos. Horses screaming, women shrieking, rifles thundering. Her mother had pushed her beneath the wagon, whispering prayers that were cut short by a sound Sarah would never forget. She squeezed her eyes shut, but the images remained. Bodies strewn across the desert floor like discarded dolls. Her younger brother Thomas, only 12, trying to reload her father's rifle with trembling fingers before... No, she couldn't think of that. She couldn't think of how she'd survived by playing dead among the corpses of everyone she loved, lying still as the bandits picked through their belongings like vultures. The attack hadn't been random. These weren't ordinary outlaws. She'd seen their faces, hard, calculating eyes. They moved too efficiently, too purposefully. They'd been searching for something. When they found it in the Hartley wagon, their leader, a man with a scar down his left cheek, had given the order she could still hear echoing in her mind. No witnesses. She had waited until nightfall before crawling from beneath her mother's body. The bandits had made camp nearby, confident in their work. She'd slipped away barefoot, carrying nothing but the clothes on her back, and a horror that threatened to crush her. That was 2 days ago. 2 days of stumbling through arroyos and over rocky ridges. Her feet were torn and bleeding, her throat parched beyond endurance. She'd found a small spring yesterday morning, but the water had only reminded her body of its other needs: food, rest, safety. Now, as darkness crept across the desert like spilled ink, Sarah knew she couldn't go much farther. Her legs trembled with every step. Dark spots danced at the edges of her vision. She'd seen the buzzards circling since noon, patient death watchers waiting for her to fall. A coyote's howl echoed through the canyon, answered by another. The sound raised gooseflesh on her arms despite the heat. They knew she was weak. Everything in this land could sense weakness. Sarah forced herself to move, each step an act of will. She had to find shelter before full dark. The rocks ahead formed a shallow amphitheater, and she thought she saw the dark mouth of a cave. If she could just reach it. Her foot caught on a stone and she went down hard. The impact knocked the air from her lungs. Her scraped palms stung, and for a moment she lay there, too spent to rise. The desert floor was still warm from the day's sun, and she found herself thinking how peaceful it would be to close her eyes and let the desert claim her. What was the point of surviving when everyone else was gone? Her family's dream of a new life had died in that blood-soaked draw. She had no money, no supplies, no destination. Even if she reached civilization, what then? A young woman alone in the territories faced few choices, none of them kind. The coyotes called again, closer now. She pictured them, lean shadows with yellow eyes, waiting. Perhaps it would be quick. Perhaps it would be mercy, but something deep within her refused to yield. She dragged herself forward on her elbows. The cave seemed miles away, wavering like a mirage. Her torn dress snagged on a thorn bush, ripping further. She left it, too weak to care about modesty anymore. Then she saw it, a thin trickle of water seeping from the rock, forming a small pool before sinking into the thirsty earth. The sight gave her just enough strength to crawl faster. The pool was barely larger than a dinner plate, but the water tasted sweet as honey. She drank in trembling sips, then splashed her face. The cave loomed before her, dark and silent, but it promised shelter. She managed to crawl just inside before her strength gave out completely. The stone floor was cool against her fevered skin. She curled into herself, trying to become small. Outside, the coyotes had gone quiet. Whether they had lost interest or were waiting, she didn't know. Her mind drifted, sliding between wakefulness and delirium. She saw her mother's face, kind and careworn, her father teaching Thomas to whittle, her mother's Bible, now lost forever. "I'm sorry," she whispered into the darkness. "Sorry for surviving." The desert night deepened, bringing a cold that sank into her bones. Sarah pulled the remnants of her dress tighter. Somewhere far off, an owl called, a lonely sound that echoed her heart. She thought about morning. If morning came, the sun would rise as always, indifferent to her suffering. The buzzards would return, and she would have to decide whether to keep fighting or to let go. The words came unbidden to her lips, a prayer her mother had taught her. "Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death." But she couldn't finish. The valley had swallowed everyone she loved. Her eyes fluttered shut. The darkness inside the cave merged with the darkness behind her eyelids. Her last thought was a question without answer. Why me? Why had I been spared? The wind keened outside, carrying whispers through the canyon. And Sarah McKenzie, the lone survivor of a massacre that should have claimed her too, lay balanced on the knife's edge between life and death, waiting for fate to decide which way she would fall. When the morning sun crept across the canyon floor, another set of eyes watched from the ridge above. Takakota, an Apache scout, young but wary, guided his paint horse through the winding paths of his ancestors' land. He saw the buzzards circling low and frowned. Death was common here, but something about their uneasy flight drew him closer. He followed the signs, disturbed sand, scraps of cloth, blood dried black on the stones, until he came to the mouth of the cave. Inside lay a white woman, crumpled and motionless, her torn dress clinging to bruised skin. For a long moment, he simply stared. He should have turned away. Her kind brought nothing but trouble to his people. But something in her stillness stopped him. She wasn't dead. Not yet. He hesitated, then knelt beside her. The sun caught in her tangled hair, and for the first time, he saw the faint rise and fall of her chest. Against every instinct, the Apache reached for his water gourd. He would later tell himself it was duty. But in that moment, as he lifted her head gently and pressed water to her lips, it felt like something else, something older than tribe or blood, something that fate itself had decided long before either of them were born. Sarah woke to the faint crackle of a small fire and the soft scent of smoke and sage. For a moment, she thought she must have died and that this was heaven, but then the pain in her shoulder brought her sharply back to life. Her body ached everywhere, her lips were dry and cracked, and her head throbbed with dull, pounding heat. When her eyes finally focused, she saw him, the man sitting near the fire, cross-legged, motionless as carved stone. His skin was the color of sun-burnished copper, his black hair bound with a strip of leather, and his dark eyes fixed on her with quiet watchfulness. He didn't move as she stirred, only spoke in a low, steady voice. "Be still, you safe." Safe. The word made no sense. Her last memory was crawling into the cave, whispering apologies to ghosts. Now, she was alive, wrapped in a deerskin blanket that covered her torn dress, her shoulder bandaged carefully. Fear rushed in before reason. She tried to sit up, but her body refused to obey. Pain tore through her shoulder like fire, and she gasped, falling back against the stone. "Don't," the man said, rising smoothly. He came closer but kept his hands visible, palms open, showing he meant no harm. "You hurt, must rest." Sarah's heart hammered in her chest. He was Apache. Every story she'd ever heard called them savages, killers who burned wagons and took scalps. Her throat closed with panic. "Please," she whispered hoarsely. "If you mean to, just end it. Don't make it worse." The man frowned, clearly not understanding at first. Then realization dawned in his dark eyes. He shook his head. "No end. Help." She blinked at him in confusion. "Help?" He knelt beside her and lifted a small clay pot from near the fire. Steam rose from a mix of herbs steeping in hot water. He tore a strip of cloth from his own shirt, soaked it, and gently pressed it to her shoulder. The shock of warmth and pain made her flinch, but he worked with quiet patience, speaking softly. "You live. Good. Many die here. You strong." Quote. Sarah stared at him, trying to understand this man who could have left her to die, or worse, but instead had carried her to safety and tended her wounds with care. "Why?" she whispered. He hesitated, as if searching for words in a language not his own. "Because life's sacred," he said slowly. "My grandmother teach this. When you can help, you do." Sarah's throat tightened. No one had called her strong since her family's death. No one had spoken to her with such calm. She wanted to believe him, but fear still clawed inside her. "What's your name?" He looked at her a long moment before answering. "Takakota." She tried to repeat it. "Taka?" A faint hint of amusement touched his eyes. Close. "Takakota means friend to all." Sarah managed a weak, disbelieving smile. "Friend to all? Even me?" He dipped the cloth again and nodded. "Even you." As the hours passed, she dozed in and out of consciousness. Each time she woke, Takakota was there, feeding the fire, checking her bandage, offering water in small, careful sips. The first light of dawn filtered into the cave, turning the red stone golden. She watched him move, silent, efficient, with a grace that came from knowing this land the way others knew prayer. When she could finally sit upright, he offered her a small piece of roasted rabbit. She ate slowly, her stomach rebelling at first, but the food steadied her. 2 days you sleep, Takakota said quietly. Fever strong, but now better. 2 days, she blinked, stunned. You stayed here. With me. He shrugged slightly. Could not leave. Spirit would not let me. The way he said it, simple and sincere, made her chest ache. She studied him more closely now. He was younger than she'd thought, perhaps 23, no older, but there was a gravity in his eyes that belonged to men who had seen too much. "Do you live here?" she asked. He shook his head. "My people far north. I scout land, watch for slavers, soldiers, thieves. Many kinds of evil now." Sarah's mind flickered to the scarred man, the one who had led the attack. "There was a man," she said. "White man. A scar here." She traced a line down her cheek. "He killed my family." Takakota's face darkened. "Josiah Creech," he said, pronouncing the name with hate that needed no translation. "I know him. He take Apache too. Men, women, children, sell to mines in Sonora. Devil man." Sarah's stomach twisted, so the nightmare had a name. "He's alive?" "Yes, always like Snake. Hard to kill." Her hands trembled. "Then he's still out there. He might come back. He'll think I'm dead, but if he finds out—" "He will not," Takakota said firmly. "You safe here. Canyon hidden. Only wind knows this place." His certainty should have comforted her, but fear clung like dust. She looked down at her torn dress, at the crusted blood along the seams. "You saw me like this?" Quote. He paused, understanding her shame. "I see wound, not woman. Only to help, no shame in survival." Sarah felt her face flush. No man had ever spoken to her that way, without judgment, without desire, only truth. She nodded slightly, unable to find words. The silence that followed was not awkward. It felt steady, like the desert itself. When she finally spoke again, her voice was softer. "You saved me." Takakota looked away toward the mouth of the cave where the light was growing. "Maybe spirits test me," he said. "Maybe they send you for reason." "For reason?" He turned back to her. "My sister," he said quietly. "Taken by Creech's men 3 summers ago, she was 14. I could not save her. When I saw you in cave, I see her face." Sarah swallowed hard. "I'm sorry," she whispered. He nodded once. "No, sorry. You live. Maybe this time I save one." The words hung between them, simple, heavy, binding. For the first time in days, Sarah felt the faint stirrings of something like hope. That night, as the desert wind sang through the rocks, Takakota built a small fire inside the cave. He ground herbs in a bowl, mixing them with water, and handed her a cup. "For sleep," he said, "no bad dreams." She hesitated, glancing at the bitter-smelling liquid. "It won't." He smiled faintly. "Only sleep. I do not save life to steal it." Ashamed of her suspicion, Sarah drank. The taste was sharp and earthy, but soon warmth spread through her limbs. As her eyes grew heavy, she heard his voice low and steady, singing in a language she didn't understand, a soft, rhythmic chant that seemed older than time. "What is that?" she murmured. "Protection song," he said. "Keep bad spirits away." She smiled faintly. "Do you really believe in that?" "I believe in what I see. Sun brings life. Water brings life. Songs bring peace." The last thing Sarah remembered before sleep claimed her was the sound of his voice weaving through the night, wrapping her in safety she hadn't known in years. For the first time since the attack, she didn't dream of blood or death. When she woke at dawn, he was still there, sitting near the embers, his knife within her reach, a gesture of trust that said more than words ever could. And as she watched him in the quiet light, Sarah realized something she hadn't expected. The man her people had called savage had shown her more mercy than any white man she'd ever known. She wasn't sure yet what that meant, but deep in her heart, she knew one thing. Her life no longer belonged to the past. Something was changing, and it had begun the moment the Apache had pulled back her torn dress, not to harm her, but to save her life. The days that followed passed in a rhythm as steady as the desert wind. Mornings came golden and cool, the sunlight spilling down the canyon walls like water. Evenings burned red before giving way to a night sky crowded with stars. Sarah grew stronger with each sunrise. Her shoulder mended cleanly under Takakota's careful tending, and she began to walk again, first with trembling steps, then with confidence. He taught her how to move quietly, how to listen to the land. "Wind tells much," he said one afternoon as they walked along the stream that wound through the hidden canyon. "If you listen right, you hear what others miss." Sarah smiled faintly. "Like what?" "Like danger," he said, tapping his ear, "or life." His lessons became their language. He showed her how to find water by reading the color of leaves, how to make fire with flint and patience, how to read animal tracks in dust. In return, she told him about books, about cities he had never seen, about the strange things people did in the name of progress and civilization. Takakota would listen quietly, his expression unreadable. "Your people build much," he said one evening, staring at the horizon, "but sometimes forget how to live." Sarah couldn't argue. At night, they shared the fire. The silence between them grew comfortable, filled with small glances, soft smiles, and words that never needed saying. Each day she felt the space between them shrink, yet both seemed afraid to step across it. One evening, as they sat near the fire, Sarah finally spoke the question that had burned in her chest since the cave. "What will you do now?" Takakota's gaze stayed on the flames. "Creech still lives," he said simply. "He will come again. Always he comes until someone stops him." "You mean to go after him?" she asked quietly. "Yes." The word was heavy, final. "You can't fight him alone," she said, her voice trembling. "He'll kill you like he killed my family." He looked at her then, eyes dark and steady. "Then better I die fighting than see others taken. He took my sister, your family, many more. Evil must end, or it spreads." Sarah's throat closed. She understood. Revenge wasn't his reason. Justice was. He carried his people's pain the way she carried hers. That night, she couldn't sleep. The thought of him walking into danger gnawed at her. When dawn broke, she rose to find him packing his gear. "You're leaving," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "You must go to Fort Buchanan," he told her gently. "Tell soldiers what happened. They must hunt Creech. You have proof, words. They will listen to you." "They won't," Sarah said bitterly. "Not to a woman. Not about a man like you. They'll blame you before they believe you." He paused, knowing she spoke truth. "Then what will you do?" "Go with you," she said simply. Takakota stared at her. "You do not belong in my world." "Maybe not," she replied, "but your world is the only place I've felt safe since mine ended." For a long moment, neither spoke. Then he nodded once. "You ride with me." They set out that afternoon, two figures against the endless sand, their shadows stretching long in the dying light. The journey south toward the border tested them both. They rode through arroyos where the wind screamed like lost souls, camped under skies so wide they made the heart ache, and watched each sunrise chase away another night of fear. Along the way, they met traders and travelers who looked at them with suspicion, an Apache and a white woman traveling together. Sarah learned to meet their stares without flinching. The first time someone muttered a slur, Takakota's hand went to his knife, but Sarah touched his arm and shook her head. "Not worth it," she whispered. He nodded, though his jaw stayed tight. By the fifth day, they reached a narrow canyon leading to the Mexican settlement of Agua Prieta. Takakota knew the alcal there, a man who had lost sons to Creech's slavers. "He will help us," he said. "But we must be careful. Creech has eyes everywhere." The alcal, Don Francisco, was a tall, dignified man with grief etched deep in his face. He listened to their story in silence. When Sarah finished, his expression hardened. "This man, Creech, is known. He hides near the Dragon Mountains. We will send word to the marshal in Tucson." But the warning came too late. That night, while they sheltered in the small church at the edge of town, Sarah woke to the faint creak of wood. She reached for her shawl and froze. Through the open doorway, torchlight flickered, shadows moving silently across the courtyard. Then came the low murmur of men's voices. Takakota was already awake. His hand went to her shoulder, urging silence. "Creech's men," he whispered. They slipped toward the back door, but before they could reach it, the main entrance burst open. 3 figures entered, guns drawn, eyes gleaming with cruel intent. Sarah recognized one instantly. The scarred man himself stood in the doorway, his grin sharp as a knife. "Well now," Josiah Creech drawled, "ain't this a sight? The preacher's daughter and her red-skinned savior." Takakota's body went still, every muscle coiled. Sarah could feel the fury in him like heat from the fire. Creech raised his gun. "You've been a thorn in my side, Apache. I think I'll start with you." Before he could fire, a shout came from outside. "Ahora!" The church doors slammed open again. Don Francisco and half the town burst in, rifles raised. Gunfire exploded, echoing through the wooden walls. Takakota shoved Sarah behind a pew, returning fire with deadly precision. One outlaw fell, then another. Creech fired once, the bullet grazing Takakota's arm before he vanished through the side door into the night. When silence fell, Sarah crawled from cover, shaking. "He's gone," she whispered. Takakota was breathing hard, blood seeping from his arm, but his voice was calm. "He will not get far." They left before dawn, following Creech's trail through the desert. By noon, they found him near a dry riverbed, his horse dead, his gun empty. The outlaw turned at their approach, desperation in his eyes. "You think you're better than me, Apache?" he spat. "You and your little woman here? You're both animals." Takakota dismounted slowly, his movements measured. "No," he said, "but you are a monster." Creech drew a hidden knife and lunged. The struggle was quick and brutal. Sand flew, blood splattered, and the desert echoed with the sound of violence. When it ended, Creech lay still, his own blade buried in his chest. Sarah ran to Takakota. "You're hurt," she cried. He shook his head, breathless but alive. "No, it is finished." For a long moment, neither spoke. The wind picked up, carrying away the last traces of the fight. Sarah looked down at the lifeless man who had taken everything from her. She felt no triumph, only release. "He can't hurt anyone again," she whispered. "No," Takakota said quietly. "Now we live." They buried Creech beneath a cairn of stones and rode on toward Tucson, where the marshal would take their testimony. Word of the outlaw's death spread quickly. Some called Takakota a hero. Others called him murderer. Sarah didn't care what anyone said. Weeks later, when the railroad company offered her a position helping teach children in the new settlement by the mountains, she accepted. Takakota stayed by her side, working as a scout and mediator for the settlers and the Apache bands. Together, they built something new, a fragile bridge between two worlds that had once seemed forever divided. One evening, as the sun bled gold across the horizon, Sarah stood outside the small schoolhouse, watching children play in the dust, Apache, Mexican, and American all together. She felt arms wrap around her waist, strong and warm. "Regrets?" Takakota asked softly. "None," she whispered. He smiled against her hair. "My grandmother would say this is balance, pain before peace." Sarah turned to face him. Then we finally found it. As the stars rose above the desert, they stood together in the fading light, a woman who had learned to see beyond fear, and a man who had chosen compassion over vengeance. Their worlds had once been enemies, but here, under the wide western sky, they were something else entirely. Not enemies, not even strangers, just two souls who had crossed the valley of death and found life waiting on the other side,